Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a Undercolor of Law take on the DOJ resignations. Now, what's happened so far? The acting Deputy Attorney General, Emil Bove, one of Trump's personal attorneys, ordered the indictment against New York City Mayor Eric Adams dismissed. Why? It wasn't about the merits. They seem to have come up with a new policy in DOJ that, having the inconvenience of being criminally charged might interfere with your ability to act as mayor, in particular, your ability to convert the New York City Police Department into an arm of ICE, which I think is what is really going on. However, the idea of dismissing the case ran into a little bit of a roadblock, about 5 or 6 roadblocks actually. So the current interim U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, that's the federal prosecutor's office for Manhattan, New York, which is where Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, was charged. They have an acting or interim U.S. Attorney, and that U.S. Attorney seems to have balked at this. Now, some background on that U.S. Attorney's office, which is the Southern District of New York, corresponding to the Judicial District, SDNY. And Bove, ironically, was an alum of that office. It's maybe the premier office in the country. It's on Wall Street, has handled all these high-profile Wall Street cases. And sort of tongue-in-cheek, within Main Justice, the leadership offices, we used to refer to the Southern District of New York as the Sovereign District of New York, meaning they were extremely independent. His reasons, Bove's reasons for the wanting the dismissal, seem completely nonsensical. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it really smacks of a quid pro quo to keep Mayor Adams in obeyance to Trump's policy achievements, or objectives rather, haven't been achieved yet. Interestingly enough, Bove didn't want to dismiss the case with prejudice, meaning he can keep that leverage on Adams to go along with what he does. Otherwise, hey, we might bring the case back. So here's the first roadblock. The interim U.S. Attorney in Southern District of New York, Ms. Sassoon, refused to dismiss the case. She has impeccable Republican credentials. She clerked for the arch-conservative Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia. In her scathing letter, she said to Bove that there were no good reasons for the case to be dismissed. She couldn't go in front of a judge and say the case should be dismissed. And she offered her resignation unless the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, reconsidered Bove's directive. She offered to meet with Bondi. Instead, Bove accepted her resignation, sent her a extremely nasty-gram, very long letter, which we'll talk about in a moment. But he added this weird point to the letter, and we'll put it up for you. Quote, "In no valid sense do you uphold the Constitution by disobeying direct orders implementing the policy of a duly elected president." That's Bove writing to Sassoon. Quote, continues, "and anyone romanticizing that behavior does a disservice to the nature of this work and the public's perception of our efforts," unquote. Kind of sounds like he almost knows her actions are going to be perceived as being heroic. Let me just add, having worked for an Attorney General of the United States and worked with Eric Holder when he was the U.S. Attorney in D.C. and later when Mr. Holder was the Deputy Attorney General, I can tell you that this kind of a rambling, whiny letter from the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General, is inconceivable under any DOJ norm. It's probably kind of inconceivable under any private sector norm as well. His letter wants to quarrel with her invoking Justice Scalia's principles that she clerked for. He wants to sound like he knows what Scalia would actually want her to do in this situation. He brings up actions by the Biden administration as though he's still on some sort of campaign trail with Trump. And of course, that's his real audience, right? He's writing for Trump. Gets worse. Not only did she resign, but we don't know this, but they must have then tried to get others in DOJ to do this dismissal since the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District wouldn't do it. That's where the case is. And the chief of the Public Integrity section then also resigned. Public Integrity is the section within the Justice Department that is tasked with prosecuting public corruption cases. Famous alum, Jack Smith. He had prosecuted the former senator and former presidential candidate, John Edwards. This is the heart of DOJ's public corruption prosecution efforts, is the Public Integrity section. So the chief resigned. And apparently, from reporting, other prosecutors within the Public Integrity section also resigned. Then the head of the criminal division, which I'll tell you about in a second, also resigned. So the criminal division, as the name suggests, encompasses the whole section of the Justice Department that specializes in criminal law, drug trafficking, cybercrime, all those things within the criminal division. The head of that is an assistant attorney general, very prestigious position, very powerful in DOJ, and they also resigned. We can read between the lines that they were asked to dismiss the case, and they also wouldn't dismiss the case. So we are going to hear, and you probably already have heard, a lot of comparisons between this slew of resignations. I think we're at 5 or 6 and counting right now. Reminds us of the Watergate era Saturday Night Massacre involving President Nixon. People made that comparison right away. I'll put up my post about it. The history there is that Nixon wanted to fire the special prosecutor who was pursuing him over the Watergate break-in cover-up scandal that would eventually lead to Nixon being threatened with impeachment and him resigning from the presidency. He wanted to fire that prosecutor. So first he told his attorney general, fire the guy. Attorney general refused, resigned. Then Nixon tried the deputy attorney general. The deputy refused and resigned. Third person he tried was Robert Bork, very famous conservative judge, who was then the Solicitor General of the United States, the guy who argues cases before the Supreme Court. And Bork said, yeah, sure, I'll fire him. So that's the famous Saturday Night Massacre where the AG and the deputy AG all quit rather than follow Nixon's orders to obviously, for political reasons, sink the investigation of him. Now, you're going to hear so much of that comparison, but I want to point out something that's very, very different. The people that resigned today were not bigwigs. They aren't political appointees. An attorney general is a cabinet level member. He can resign, she can resign. They're going to have plenty of work to do. These are career people who took a stand, threatened their livelihoods, and stood up and said, I'm not going to do this. And that's a really big difference. Now, the famous Watergate era Saturday Night Massacre started Nixon's downfall. It eventually led to something like 21 different articles of impeachment, Congress people pressuring him to be impeached. Some 50,000 phone calls came in the following day. I think we can do a lot better than that if we all start calling. And it led really to the demise of Nixon ultimately, politically, that effort, because it was so public that this happened. What's happening today with President Trump's reaction to this? Well, let's take a listen to him being asked the question of how he was meeting with the Indian Prime Minister.
I could ask you about a development in your hometown today. The U.S. Attorney has resigned over the DOJ's request to drop the case into Eric Adams. Did you personally request the Justice Department to drop that case?
No, I didn't. I know nothing about it. To your other question, that U.S. Attorney was actually fired. I don't know if he or she resigned, but that U.S. Attorney was fired. Okay, go ahead.
So you'll see that first, right in the beginning of the clip, he denies any knowledge, right? He says, I don't know anything about it. Then at the end, it looks like someone like whispered something in his ear, and then he switches, oh, I think that U.S. Attorney, meaning the one for the Southern District, was fired. Okay, now we know that she was not fired because she submitted her resignation letter. What it does show us is that Trump wants to distance himself from this, which is interesting, right? Because after all, he feels DOJ is just his personal attorney. Why shouldn't they answer to him? Why not lean into this and say, yeah, this is unjust prosecution. I told them to stop it. They do what I do. We're changing things. For some reason, he wants to distance himself from this. Maybe because he realizes that this is not going to be good for him in the sense of it gives the public, it gives the Democrats, it gives people resisting his fascist regime a really good point to say, look, you talk about how you're against the weaponization of the Justice Department. How could you have greater weaponization than this? So he probably senses rightly that this is going to be a big problem for them. So we're going to keep an eye on this. There's a lot yet to come because so far there's nobody to actually dismiss the case. When they do seek to dismiss it, I'm sure they'll find somebody in DOJ that's willing to sign their name to that paper. It might be sort of amusing to make Bove or Attorney General Bondi have to do it themselves. The judge in the case in the Southern District, Judge Ho, still has to accept it. Theoretically, the judge can say, no, I'm not accepting this dismissal. Those alternatives, if the judge does that, are kind of hard. You don't have a prosecutor to do it. The judge could, you'll hear talk about this, the judge could appoint like their own special prosecutor to do the case. And kind of hard. They don't have the resources of the Justice Department. It's not like when justice itself appoints a special counsel. But more practically, the judge can bring DOJ officials in to explain themselves. What's the reason for this dismissal? That could be very damaging, very enlightening. And I'll leave you with one last thought, which is in a footnote to her resignation letter, Sassoon talks about this very, very troubling episode where she was meeting with Bove, the Deputy Attorney General, and Adams' lawyers. And there was clearly the equivalent of a quid pro quo going on, which was that Adams was basically pitching, hey, dismiss this case. I'm here to help you with immigration issues. Here's what's really troubling. Bove reprimanded members of the prosecution team for taking notes. He didn't want anyone to take notes. Remind you of someone? And then he had any notes collected and confiscated at the end of the meeting. Sounds like a cover-up to me. All right, that's it for now. We'll keep an eye on this and other things. Thanks for the replies and comments. They're really helpful to know what to cover. And do follow me on Blue Sky, trying to do some quick reactions on that, keeping everyone abreast of what's happening. In the meantime, we'll do a little bit of a more in-depth analysis when we can here. All right, talk to you soon.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.